Nothing says middle-aged stability like watching your wife squeeze into a Catwoman suit that could double as shrink wrap. I stood in our bedroom doorway, nursing my third beer of the evening, watching Alicia perform what looked like advanced yoga just to get the zipper past her hips. "Greg, stop staring and help me with this," she huffed, her face flushed from the effort. I set down my beer and approached cautiously. The black latex clung to every curve, leaving nothing to imagination. "You sure this is appropriate for Richard's party? It's just the neighborhood crowd." "It's Halloween, Greg. The whole point is to dress up." She shot me a look in the mirror. Unlike some people who think a pirate hat constitutes a costume, I adjusted my plastic sword and shrugged. "I'm a simple man with simple needs." "That's the problem," she muttered, but I caught it. The comment stung more than it should have. Lately, everything between us felt like walking on broken glass. 20 years of marriage, 2 kids now in college, and we'd somehow become strangers, sharing a mortgage. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Forget it." She turned away, but I saw her expression in the mirror, the same look she'd been giving me for months. Disappointment mixed with something darker. Resentment, maybe. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Party's starting! Where are you guys?" "Come on," Alicia said, grabbing her purse. "Richard's been planning this for weeks. Try to have fun for once." The October air bit through my cheap pirate shirt as we walked the 3 blocks to Richard and Nikki's house. Jack-o'-lanterns grinned from every porch, and costumed kids darted between houses with bulging pillowcases. It should have been festive, but the silence between Alicia and me felt heavier than my plastic sword. Richard's house blazed with orange lights, fake cobwebs draped across the porch like party streamers. Through the windows, I could see the living room packed with neighbors in various states of costume creativity. Richard himself answered the door dressed as a vampire, complete with fangs that made him lisp. "Greg, Alicia, you made it." He pulled us inside, his cape swirling dramatically. "Alicia, wow, that costume is... wow." I watched Richard's eyes travel the length of my wife's body. She preened under his attention, doing a little spin that made the latex squeak. "Thanks, Richard. Greg thinks it's too much." "Greg's crazy," Richard laughed, but his eyes never left Alicia. "Come on, the bar's in the kitchen." The house pulsed with music and laughter. I recognized most of the faces. Neighbors, Alicia's book club friends, guys from my old softball league. Everyone seemed to be having the kind of effortless fun that had become foreign to me. In the kitchen, I grabbed another beer while Alicia accepted compliments on her costume from a group of women dressed as various Disney princesses. Their husbands clustered around the island, debating fantasy football with the intensity of Supreme Court justices. "Greg!" John Martinez waved me over. He was dressed as a cowboy, his beer already working its magic on his volume control. "Settle an argument. Tom here thinks the Bears are going to the playoffs." Tom, dressed as a zombie businessman, shook his head. I said they had a chance. John's been putting words in my mouth all night. "The Bears couldn't make the playoffs if every other team forfeited," I said, falling into the familiar rhythm of sports debate. For a few minutes, I almost felt normal. That's when I noticed Dominic. He stood near the back door, dressed as Tarzan in what appeared to be a loincloth and nothing else. His gym-sculpted chest gleamed under the kitchen lights, and he was deep in conversation with Alicia and her friend Susie, who'd come as a matching Catwoman. Dominic worked at the Ford plant, lifted weights religiously, and had the kind of easy confidence that made other men feel inadequate. He was also single, recently divorced, and had been showing up at more neighborhood gatherings lately. "Earth to Greg," John said, following my gaze. "You okay, man?" "Yeah, just keeping an eye on things." "Relax, it's a party. Your wife can talk to whoever she wants." But it wasn't just talking. Alicia was laughing at something Dominic said, her hand resting on his bicep. The gesture looked natural, comfortable, too comfortable. I tried to rejoin the football conversation, but my attention kept drifting to the trio by the door. Susie seemed to be playing wing woman, steering other people away when they tried to join their conversation. "I need another beer," I announced, pushing through the crowd toward the refrigerator. As I approached, I caught fragments of their conversation. "Can't keep pretending forever," Dominic was saying. "It's complicated," Alicia replied. "Greg doesn't understand." "Maybe it's time he learned," Susie added. They noticed me approaching and abruptly changed topics. "Greg," Alicia's voice was too bright, too cheerful. "Dominic was just telling us about his new motorcycle." "Harley Davidson," Dominic said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Maybe I'll take you for a ride sometime." The comment hung in the air like smoke. I looked at my wife, waiting for her to deflect, to make some joke about being too old for motorcycles. Instead, she blushed. "That sounds fun," she said. Something cold settled in my stomach. I grabbed my beer and retreated to the living room, where Richard had started a game of charades. I tried to focus on the game, but my mind kept replaying that moment in the kitchen. The party swirled around me in a haze of laughter and music. I made small talk, refilled my drink, and played the part of the happy husband. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching my life from outside, like looking through someone else's window. Around 11, people started talking about calling it a night. I looked around for Alicia and found the kitchen empty except for dirty dishes and abandoned cups. The back door stood slightly ajar. I stepped outside onto the deck and heard voices from the garden. Richard had strung lights through the trees, creating intimate pockets of shadow and illumination. In one of those pockets, I saw them. Alicia and Dominic stood close together near the garden shed, their conversation intense and whispered. As I watched, he reached up and touched her face, his thumb tracing her cheek. She didn't pull away. "Enjoying the show?" I spun around to find Susie behind me, still in her Catwoman costume, but with her mask pushed up on her head. "What's going on, Susie?" She studied my face for a long moment. "You really don't know, do you?" "Know what?" "Greg, I like you. I always have. But you've been sleepwalking through your marriage for years. Did you really think Alicia would wait forever?" The words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's time you woke up." Before I could respond, she walked back into the house, leaving me alone on the deck with the sound of my heart hammering in my ears. I looked back toward the garden, but Alicia and Dominic were gone. I found Alicia in the kitchen, helping Nikki load the dishwasher as if nothing had happened. Her mask was slightly askew, and there was grass on her boots. "Ready to go?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Already? The party's just getting good." She glanced around the kitchen, which was definitely winding down. "It's almost midnight, and I have work tomorrow." She sighed dramatically. "Fine. Let me find my purse." The walk home stretched longer than the 3 blocks it actually was. Alicia chattered about the party, the costumes, how much fun everyone seemed to be having. I made appropriate responses, but my mind was stuck on that moment in the garden. "Dominic seems nice," I said as we reached our front door. "He is. Very sweet." Her tone was casual, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Inside, we went through the motions of getting ready for bed. Alicia struggled out of the Catwoman suit while I hung up my pirate gear. We brushed our teeth side by side at the bathroom sink like we had thousands of times before, but everything felt different now. In bed, she turned away from me immediately, claiming exhaustion. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe and wondering when we'd become strangers. The next morning brought no relief. Alicia was up early, bustling around the kitchen in her yoga clothes, phone pressed to her ear. "No, Susie. I think the black one would be better," she was saying as I came downstairs. "The red is too obvious." She noticed me and quickly ended the call. "Morning," I said, pouring coffee. "What's too obvious?" "Just talking about outfits for Nikki's birthday dinner next week. Nothing important." But she was already grabbing her keys and water bottle, heading for the door. "I'm meeting the girls for yoga. Don't wait up for lunch." She was gone before I could respond, leaving me alone with my coffee and growing suspicions. I spent the morning doing yard work, trying to lose myself in the mindless task of raking leaves. But every time I looked up, I thought about Dominic's hand on my wife's face, the way she'd leaned into his touch. My phone rang around noon. Richard. "Hey man, thanks for coming last night. Great party, right?" "Yeah, it was fun." I tried to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. "Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Is everything okay with you and Alicia?" My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. You just seemed distant last night. And Alicia was asking some weird questions." "What kind of questions?" Richard hesitated. "About divorce lawyers. She said it was for a friend, but I thought you should know." The rake slipped from my hands. "She what?" Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But Greg, if something's going on, you guys should talk. Don't let it fester. After Richard hung up, I sat on my front steps and tried to process what I'd learned. My wife was asking about divorce lawyers and spending private moments with Dominic. The evidence was circumstantial, but damning. I needed more information. Alicia's laptop sat on the kitchen counter, password protected but not impossible to crack. She'd always used variations of our anniversary date. After 3 tries, I was in. Her email revealed nothing obvious, but her browser history was more illuminating. Multiple searches for divorce attorneys, articles about asset division, and something that made my blood run cold. How to prove emotional neglect in marriage. I was still staring at the screen when I heard her car in the driveway. I quickly closed the laptop and tried to look casual. "How was yoga?" I asked as she came through the door. "Good. Challenging." She seemed flushed, but not from exercise. "I'm going to shower." While water ran upstairs, I noticed her phone on the counter. She'd forgotten it in her rush to get upstairs. Before I could think better of it, I picked it up. The lock screen showed 3 missed calls from Dominic and a text preview. "Can't stop thinking about last night." My hands shook as I set the phone down. 20 years of marriage, and it was ending with a text message I wasn't supposed to see. When Alicia came back downstairs, her phone was exactly where she'd left it. She checked it immediately, her face cycling through surprise, panic, and something that might have been relief. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine, just work stuff." But she was already typing a response, her fingers flying over the screen. That evening, we sat in our living room like actors who'd forgotten their lines. Alicia pretended to read while I channel surfed aimlessly. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. "Greg," she finally said, not looking up from her book. "We need to talk." Here it comes, I thought. The conversation that would end everything. "I've been thinking about us. About where we are." I muted the TV and turned to face her. "Okay. We're not happy. You know that, right? We haven't been happy for a long time." I thought we were just going through a rough patch. She finally looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Pity. "Greg, it's been more than a patch. We're different people now. We want different things." "What do you want, Alicia?" The question hung between us. She opened her mouth, closed it, then shook her head. "I want to feel alive again. I want to feel wanted. I want you." "No, you don't." "Not really? You want the idea of me, the wife who keeps your life organized and looks good at company parties, but you don't see me anymore." Her words stung because they held enough truth to hurt. When had I stopped really looking at my wife? When had our conversations become logistics about schedules and bills? "We can fix this," I said. "We can go to counseling, take a trip, whatever you need." She was already shaking her head. "It's too late for that." "Because of Dominic?" The name dropped between us like a bomb. Alicia's face went white, then red. "What did you say?" "I saw you with him last night, in Richard's garden." She stood up abruptly, her book falling to the floor. "You were spying on me?" "I was looking for my wife at a party. I didn't expect to find her in another man's arms." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Alicia? Because from where I stood, it looked pretty clear." We stared at each other across our living room, 20 years of marriage reduced to this moment of brutal honesty. "I care about him," she said quietly. "He makes me feel things I'd forgotten I could feel." The admission hit me harder than I'd expected. Part of me had hoped for denial, for some explanation that would make everything make sense again. "How long? Does it matter? It matters to me." She sank back onto the couch, suddenly looking older than her 45 years. 3 months, maybe 4. It started as friendship, but you wanted more. I wanted to feel like a woman again instead of just a wife and mother and housekeeper." Her words were knives, each one finding its mark. Because underneath the anger and betrayal, I recognized the truth in what she was saying. I had stopped seeing her as anything but a fixture in my life. "So what happens now?" I asked. "I don't know. I need time to think." "Are you leaving me for him?" "I'm leaving you for me, Greg. Dominic is just... he helped me remember who I used to be." That night, I lay awake listening to Alicia breathe beside me and wondered if this was how marriages really ended. Not with dramatic fights or thrown dishes, but with quiet admissions in suburban living rooms. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. What Alicia didn't know, what nobody knew, was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd become a millionaire. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months, she'd been complaining about money, about feeling trapped by our middle-class existence. She'd started working part-time at a boutique downtown, claiming she needed financial independence. Meanwhile, I'd been quietly building something that would change everything. RestaurantLink, my restaurant management software startup, had been my secret project for 2 years. Working nights and weekends, I developed a system that streamlined inventory, scheduling, and payroll for restaurant chains. It was born from my 15 years as a district manager for a regional restaurant group. I knew the pain points, and I knew how to solve them. The acquisition offer from TechFlow Solutions had come out of nowhere. 7 figures for my little side project that Alicia dismissed as Greg's computer hobby. The closing had happened the day before Richard's Halloween party, and I'd been planning to surprise her with the news. Instead, I'd come home to find her in another man's arms. Now, sitting in my car outside the lawyer's office on a gray November morning, I stared at the divorce papers Alicia had served me the night before. She'd been efficient about it, hired Jennifer Walsh, one of the best divorce attorneys in the city. The papers cited irreconcilable differences and requested an equitable division of assets. If she only knew what those assets actually included. I'd kept the acquisition quiet for good reasons. The deal included a 2-year consulting contract worth another $500,000, plus potential royalties if the software performed well. But more importantly, I'd been planning to use the money to surprise Alicia, maybe buy that lake house she'd always dreamed about, or take the European vacation we'd been talking about for years. Now those plans felt like artifacts from someone else's life. My phone buzzed with a text from my own attorney, Michael Chen. "Don't sign anything yet. We need to talk." Michael had been my lawyer since the early days of RestaurantLink. He understood the complexities of the acquisition and had helped structure it to minimize tax implications. He also knew that Alicia had no idea what she was walking away from. "Greg," Michael said as I entered his office, "I've reviewed the papers. She's asking for half of everything, including your business interests. She doesn't know about the acquisition. That's problematic. You have a legal obligation to disclose all assets during divorce proceedings." "I'm not hiding it. I just haven't told her yet." Michael leaned back in his chair. "This puts us in an interesting position. She's filed based on incomplete information about your financial situation. What are my options? Legally, you disclose everything and prepare for a fight. She'll claim half of the acquisition proceeds. And practically?" Michael was quiet for a long moment. "How bitter do you want this to get, Greg?" I thought about Dominic's hand on my wife's face, about her admission that she'd been planning this for months while I worked to build a better future for us. "She made her choice," I said. "I'm just going to make sure she lives with the consequences." Over the next week, I played the part of the devastated husband. I signed the divorce papers without protest, agreed to mediation, and let Alicia believe she was getting exactly what she wanted: freedom from our middle-class prison. The house would be sold, proceeds split 50-50. Our modest savings account would be divided. My computer hobby business was valued at essentially nothing, since I'd never shown her the acquisition documents. What she didn't realize was that I'd already moved the acquisition funds into a trust for our kids' education, perfectly legal and beyond the reach of divorce proceedings. The consulting contract was structured as future earnings, not current assets. By the time she discovered the truth, it would be too late. "You're being very reasonable about this," she said one evening as we sat at our kitchen table, going over the settlement details. "I thought you'd fight harder." "What's the point? You've made up your mind." She looked almost disappointed by my lack of resistance. "I just want you to know this isn't about money." "Of course not," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It's about feeling alive again." "Exactly." She seemed relieved that I understood. "Dominic and I are talking about traveling together, maybe moving somewhere warmer, starting fresh." "That sounds nice." What I didn't tell her was that I'd also discovered something interesting about her new boyfriend. Dominic's recent divorce had left him with significant debt, credit cards, a motorcycle loan, and alimony payments to his ex-wife. He was living paycheck to paycheck at the Ford plant, despite his gym-sculpted appearance and confident demeanor. I'd learned this through Richard, who'd heard it from John, who'd gotten it from Tom, whose brother worked with Dominic. Small-town gossip networks were remarkably efficient when you knew how to use them. "Greg?" Alicia was looking at me with concern. "You seem distracted." "Just thinking about the future, it's a big change." "It is? But I think we'll both be happier in the long run." I nodded and returned to the settlement documents, hiding my smile. She was right about one thing. I was definitely going to be happier in the long run. The mediation session was scheduled for the following week. By then, I'd have all my ducks in a row. Alicia would get exactly what she'd asked for: freedom from our marriage and a clean break from our shared life. She just wouldn't get the financial windfall she was counting on. That night, I lay in our guest bedroom. I'd moved out of the master suite to give her space and planned my next moves. The house would sell quickly. It was in a desirable neighborhood and priced to move. I'd already found a small condo downtown, closer to the restaurants I managed. My new life was taking shape, and for the first time since Halloween night, I felt something approaching optimism. My phone buzzed with an email from TechFlow Solutions. The software integration was ahead of schedule, and early performance metrics were exceeding projections. The royalty payments would likely be substantial. I deleted the email without responding. There would be time to deal with business success later. Right now, I had a marriage to end and a new life to begin. A month after our divorce was finalized, I was settling into my new routine. The condo downtown was smaller than our suburban house, but it felt like freedom. No more tiptoeing around Alicia's moods, no more pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I'd thrown myself into work, helping 3 new restaurants launch their operations with my management systems. The irony that I was busier than ever in the restaurant business, just as my software was revolutionizing it, wasn't lost on me. The TechFlow acquisition had remained under wraps. I'd signed additional NDAs as part of my consulting contract, which gave me perfect cover for keeping the windfall quiet. As far as anyone knew, I was Greg Thompson, recently divorced district manager, starting over in a 1-bedroom condo. That's when Alicia's message arrived. "We need to talk urgently. It's important. Please call me." I stared at the text for several minutes. We'd had minimal contact since the divorce was finalized, just logistics about selling the house and dividing the last of our shared possessions. The house had sold faster than expected, and she'd taken her half of the proceeds and disappeared with Dominic to Florida, talking about opening a beach bar or some other romantic nonsense. What could possibly be urgent now? I called her back, curious despite myself. "Greg, thank God." Her voice sounded strained, almost panicked. "I need to see you. Can you meet me somewhere?" "Alicia, we're divorced. Whatever this is about, we can handle it over the phone." "No, we can't. Please, just meet me at Rosario's. You know, our place." Rosario's was the Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date 22 years ago. We'd returned there for anniversaries, celebrations, and important conversations throughout our marriage. The choice of location felt deliberately manipulative. "I'll be there in an hour," I said. Rosario's hadn't changed much. Same red checkered tablecloths, same smell of garlic and basil, same corner booth where we'd sat as young people planning a future together. Alicia was already waiting when I arrived, and I was shocked by her appearance. Gone was the confident woman who'd walked out of our marriage a month ago. She looked pale, tired, and significantly thinner. Her hands shook as she lifted her wine glass. "You look terrible," I said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Thanks. You always knew how to make a girl feel special." But there was no bite in her sarcasm, just exhaustion. "What's this about, Alicia?" She took a long sip of wine before answering. "I made a mistake, a huge mistake." "Leaving me?" "No, yes, maybe." She rubbed her temples. "It's complicated." "Most things are. Start from the beginning." She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dominic isn't who I thought he was." "What do you mean?" "He's been using me, Greg. The whole time, he was using me." I waited for her to continue, but she seemed lost in her own thoughts. "Using you how?" "For money. For access to our friends, our social circle, for information about our finances during the divorce." A cold realization began forming in my mind. "What kind of information?" "He kept asking about your business, about what you were hiding. He was convinced you had money stashed away somewhere." "And what did you tell him?" "The truth, that you managed restaurants and had some silly computer project that never made any money." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "That was the truth, wasn't it?" I kept my expression neutral. "What do you think?" "I think—" She paused, studying my face. "I think maybe I didn't know my husband as well as I thought I did." The waiter appeared, and I ordered coffee. Alicia asked for another glass of wine, which told me this conversation was going to get worse before it got better. "Tell me about Florida," I said. "It was a disaster. Dominic had promised we'd start fresh, maybe buy a little place near the beach, but when we got there, he had no money, none. He'd been living on credit cards and lies." "So you used your half of the house money?" She nodded miserably. "At first, just for a deposit on a rental, then for his motorcycle payment, because he said he needed it for work, then for other things, always with promises that he'd pay me back." "How much is left?" "Nothing." The word came out as a sob. "He cleaned me out and disappeared 3 days ago, left a note saying he'd found someone with better prospects." I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I found myself feeling sorry for her. She'd been played by an expert, and her pride had made her an easy target. "Where are you staying now?" "A motel outside Tampa. I can afford maybe 2 more nights." "What about your job at the boutique?" "I quit when we moved to Florida, burned that bridge pretty thoroughly." We sat in silence while I processed this information. My ex-wife was broke, stranded in Florida, and apparently beginning to suspect that she'd made some very poor choices. "Why are you telling me this, Alicia?" "Because I think I made the biggest mistake of my life. And because—" She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "Because I saw this." She showed me a screenshot of a local business journal article. The headline read, TechFlow Solutions acquires local restaurant software startup for undisclosed sum. My photo was prominently featured, along with quotes about the revolutionary impact of RestaurantLink on the industry. When did this come out? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Yesterday. A friend from book club sent it to me. She thought I'd be interested since we were married when you developed it. I handed her phone back. Congratulations on your discovery. Greg, how much? Her voice was pleading now. How much was the sale worth? Why does it matter? We're divorced. Because if you had this money during our marriage, I'm entitled to half. That's the law. There it was. The real reason for this urgent meeting. Not guilt over leaving me, not regret over her choices with Dominic. She thought she'd found a way to solve her financial problems. Alicia, the acquisition closed after you filed for divorce, after you'd already made it clear our marriage was over. But you must have been negotiating it while we were still married. That makes it a marital asset. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the calculation. She'd already talked to a lawyer, probably on the drive here from Florida. Even if that were true, I said carefully, you'd have a hard time proving it, and you'd have to explain why you didn't disclose your affair during our divorce proceedings. Her face went white. What affair? The one with Dominic that started 4 months before you filed, the one that probably influenced your decision to end our marriage, the one that would constitute adultery under state law? You can't prove that. I pulled out my own phone and showed her a screenshot. Text messages between her and Dominic, downloaded from our shared phone plan before the divorce was finalized. Actually, I can. I've been able to prove it for quite some time. She stared at the screen, her face cycling through shock, anger, and finally resignation. You knew. The whole time, you knew, and you didn't say anything? You made your choice, Alicia. I just decided to let you live with the consequences. So what now? You're rich and I'm broke, and that's supposed to be justice? I signaled for the check. What happens now is you figure out your own life, just like you wanted. Greg, please. I know I hurt you, but we were married for 20 years. That has to count for something. It did count for something. It counted for exactly half of our assets at the time of divorce, which you received. I'm asking for help, as someone who used to care about me. I left cash on the table and stood up. I did care about you, Alicia, more than you'll ever know, but you made it very clear that wasn't enough. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? I'm going to do exactly what you did. I'm going to choose myself for once. I was halfway to the door when she called after me. This isn't over, Greg. If you made that money while we were married, I have rights. I turned back to face her one last time. Good luck proving it, and good luck finding a lawyer who'll take your case on contingency when you're living in a motel. 2 weeks after our meeting at Rosario's, Alicia was back in town. I knew this because Richard called to warn me. She's staying with Susie, he said, and she's been asking a lot of questions about your business. What kind of questions? Timeline stuff. When you started developing the software, when the negotiations began, whether you ever mentioned it during the marriage. I wasn't surprised. Desperate people do desperate things, and Alicia was clearly desperate. What are people telling her? The truth, mostly. That you worked on it nights and weekends, that you never talked about it much. But Greg... Richard paused. She's also been spreading some stories about you hiding assets during the divorce. What kind of stories? That you deliberately concealed the software deal to cheat her out of her fair share, that you're not the honest guy everyone thinks you are. This was exactly what I'd expected. Alicia had always been skilled at managing narratives, at presenting herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. Now she was using those skills to rehabilitate her image while painting me as the villain. How are people responding? Mixed reactions. Some people think she's got a point. 7 figures is a lot of money to keep quiet. Others remember how she left and think she's getting what she deserves. And you? Richard was quiet for a moment. I think you're both adults who made choices, but I also think this is about to get ugly. He was right. That evening, I found Alicia waiting by my car when I left work. We need to talk, she said. We talked, at Rosario's. That was before I spoke to a lawyer. And what did your lawyer tell you? That I might have a case, that concealing assets during divorce proceedings is fraud. I unlocked my car and tossed my briefcase in the back seat. Did you tell your lawyer about Dominic? Ah, that's not relevant. It's very relevant. Adultery is grounds for fault-based divorce in this state, which means you could have been entitled to significantly less than half our assets. You didn't file for fault-based divorce. No, I was generous. I let you have your no-fault divorce and your 50%, but if you want to relitigate this, we can discuss all the things that didn't come up the first time. She stepped closer, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. Greg, I'm broke. I have nothing. You have millions. I have what I earned after you left me. You earned it while we were married. I developed software while we were married. I sold it after you filed for divorce. There's a difference. The lawyer is telling you what you want to hear because you're paying him. But here's what he probably didn't mention. Litigation is expensive. Even if you had a case, which you don't, you'd need to front tens of thousands in legal fees. Money you don't have. Her face crumpled. So that's it? You're just going to let me lose everything? You already lost everything, Alicia. You lost it the moment you decided our marriage wasn't worth fighting for. She was crying now, and part of me felt sorry for her, but a larger part remembered the humiliation of that Halloween night, the months of lies and deception, the casual way she'd discarded 20 years of marriage for a man who'd ultimately discarded her. I know you hate me, she said, but please just help me get back on my feet. A loan, something, I'll pay you back. With what? You have no job, no assets, and no prospects. You're a 45-year-old woman with a gap in her employment history and a reputation for making poor decisions. The words were harsh, but they were also true, and sometimes the truth is the cruelest thing you can offer someone. I could go to the press, she said quietly. Tell them about how you hid millions from your wife during your divorce. You could try. Of course, then I'd have to tell them about your affair, your boyfriend's criminal history, and the way you abandoned your marriage for a man who cleaned out your bank account. Dominic has a criminal history. I pulled out my phone and showed her another screenshot. Drug possession, assault, check fraud. Your boyfriend has quite a resume. Did he mention that while he was seducing you? She stared at the screen, her face going pale. How do you know all this? I know a lot of things, Alicia. I know that he targeted you specifically because he thought I had hidden money. I know that he's done this before with at least 2 other women. I know that he's currently in Miami, working the same con on a recently divorced real estate agent. You're lying. Private investigators are expensive, but they're thorough. I can show you photos if you'd like. The fight went out of her then. She leaned against my car, looking older than her years. Why? She asked. Why did you investigate him? Because I wanted to understand what I was up against, and because I wanted to make sure you understood exactly what you'd chosen over me. So this is all revenge? No, Alicia. Revenge would have been exposing your affair during the divorce and leaving you with nothing. This is just consequences. I got in my car and started the engine. She stepped back, but didn't move away. Greg, she said through the window. I'm sorry. For all of it. I'm sorry. I know you are, but sorry doesn't change anything. As I drove away, I saw her in my rearview mirror, standing alone in the parking lot. For a moment, I almost turned around, almost offered her the help she was asking for. But then I remembered the way she'd looked at Dominic in Richard's garden, the way she'd planned our divorce while I was working to build us a better future, the way she'd thrown away 20 years of marriage for a man who'd ultimately thrown her away too. Some consequences you have to live with. 3 days later, my carefully constructed new life exploded. I was at the annual Chamber of Commerce dinner, accepting an award for Entrepreneur of the Year for the RestaurantLink acquisition, when Alicia made her move. The dinner was held at the Marriott downtown, with about 300 of the city's business and civic leaders in attendance. I'd been reluctant to go, but my lawyer Michael had insisted it would be good for my public image. Ladies and gentlemen, the chamber president was saying, this year's award goes to someone who exemplifies the entrepreneurial spirit that makes our community strong. Greg Thompson's innovative restaurant management software has been acquired by TechFlow Solutions for a sum that puts our city on the map for tech innovation. Polite applause filled the ballroom as I stood to accept the award. That's when I saw her. Alicia stood at the back of the room, dressed in a black cocktail dress that I recognized from our marriage. She was holding her phone, and I could see she was recording. I accepted the award and gave a brief speech about innovation and perseverance, all while watching my ex-wife document everything. When I returned to my table, she was gone. The attack came the next morning. I woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The first one, from Richard, simply said, "Turn on Channel 7. Now." The local morning show was running a segment called Divorce Deception, Local Entrepreneur Accused of Hiding Millions. Alicia sat across from the anchor, looking appropriately wronged and sympathetic. I trusted my husband, she was saying. We were married for 20 years. I never imagined he would hide something this significant from me. And you had no idea about the software sale during your divorce proceedings? The anchor asked. None at all. Greg told me it was just a hobby. something that might make a few $1,000s someday. I found out about the millions the same way everyone else did, by reading about it in the newspaper. What are you hoping to accomplish by speaking out? I want people to understand that divorce fraud is real, that women need to be aware of what their husbands are really worth before they sign any papers. The segment included my photo from the chamber dinner, footage of me accepting the award, and a graphic showing estimated sale price, $2.5 million, next to a photo of our modest former home. My phone rang. Michael Chen. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "I'm watching it now. It gets worse. She's filed a motion to set aside the divorce decree based on newly discovered evidence, and she's hired Jennifer Walsh again." Jennifer Walsh was the shark who'd represented her in our divorce. If she was taking this case, it meant she thought there was money to be made. What are our options? We fight it. But Greg, this is going to get expensive and very public. Are you prepared for that? I looked at the TV, where they were now showing a photo of Alicia and me from Happier Times, overlaid with the words, "Betrayed wife seeks justice." "Do whatever you have to do," I said. The next few weeks were a nightmare of legal motions, media attention, and social ostracism. The story had legs because it touched on universal fears: spousal deception, hidden assets, the vulnerability of divorce. Alicia played her part perfectly. She gave interviews about the emotional devastation of discovering her husband's betrayal. She appeared on a local radio show to discuss financial transparency in marriage. She even started a blog called Divorced and Defrauded that gained a surprising following. Meanwhile, I became the villain in my own life story. Former friends crossed the street to avoid me. Colleagues whispered when I walked into meetings. The restaurants I managed started getting negative reviews that mentioned my dishonest character. The legal battle was equally brutal. Jennifer Walsh had done her homework, filing motions that painted me as a calculating deceiver who'd deliberately hidden assets to cheat my wife. They demanded forensic accounting of all my business activities during the marriage, discovery of all communications with TechFlow Solutions, and depositions from everyone who'd known about the software development. But they'd made one crucial mistake. During Alicia's deposition, Walsh had coached her to emphasize how blindsided she'd been by the software sale, how she'd had no idea it was valuable, how I'd deliberately kept her in the dark about our financial future. "I trusted my husband completely," Alicia testified. "I never questioned his business activities because I believed he was honest with me." That's when Michael played our trump card. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "you've testified that you trusted your husband completely and never questioned his business activities." "That's correct." "So you were being equally honest with him about your activities?" "Of course." Michael opened a folder and pulled out a stack of documents. "Then perhaps you can explain these text messages between you and Dominic Reeves, dated 4 months before you filed for divorce." Walsh objected, but the judge allowed the evidence. The messages were devastating, not just proof of the affair, but proof that Alicia had been planning the divorce while actively deceiving me about her intentions. "And these hotel receipts," Michael continued, "showing charges to your credit card for rooms you shared with Mr. Reeves during your marriage." "I can explain." "And this email to Mr. Reeves where you write, 'Greg has no idea what's coming. After the divorce, we'll be free to start our real life together.'" The deposition room went silent. Walsh was frantically scribbling notes, trying to figure out how to salvage her case. But Michael wasn't finished. "Mrs. Thompson, you've painted yourself as the innocent victim of your husband's deception. But these documents show that you were conducting an affair, planning a divorce, and actively deceiving your husband about your intentions. Is that correct?" "That's different." "Is it?" "You've accused my client of hiding assets that he developed through his own labor and sold after you'd already filed for divorce. But you were hiding an entire relationship that directly led to the end of your marriage. Which deception is more relevant to the divorce proceedings?" The case began to unravel from there. Walsh tried to argue that my adultery didn't negate Alicia's claim to marital assets, but the judge was clearly troubled by the timeline of events. More damaging was what we discovered about Dominic. My private investigator had been thorough. Dominic Reeves wasn't just a serial con man, he was a professional one. He specifically targeted women going through divorces, seduced them, convinced them to leave their husbands, then cleaned out their assets, and moved on to the next mark. Alicia had been his third victim in 2 years. When this information came out during discovery, the media narrative shifted dramatically. Suddenly, Alicia wasn't the wronged wife seeking justice. She was the gullible woman who'd been conned by a professional grifter. The blog posts stopped. The interviews dried up. Even Jennifer Walsh began making noises about settlement. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in December. I arrived at the courthouse to find a small crowd of reporters and photographers, though much smaller than the circus that had surrounded the early proceedings. Alicia sat at the plaintiff's table with Jennifer Walsh, looking nothing like the confident woman who'd launched this legal assault 3 months earlier. The media attention, the revelations about Dominic, and the stress of the litigation had taken their toll. Judge Morrison called the hearing to order and got straight to the point. "I've reviewed all the evidence and arguments in this case," she said. "The plaintiff seeks to set aside the divorce decree based on alleged concealment of assets by the defendant. The defendant argues that the assets in question were not marital property and that the plaintiff's own conduct bars her from relief." She paused, looking directly at Alicia. "Mrs. Thompson, you've asked this court to believe that you were the innocent victim of your husband's deception. However, the evidence shows that you were conducting an extramarital affair for months before filing for divorce, that you actively planned the end of your marriage while deceiving your husband about your intentions, and that you left the marriage for a man who subsequently defrauded you of your divorce settlement." Walsh started to object, but the judge held up her hand. "Furthermore, the software that forms the basis of your claim was developed by your husband using his own time and expertise. The sale of that software was negotiated and completed after you had already filed for divorce and made clear your intention to end the marriage. Even if this court were inclined to consider it marital property, which it is not, your own conduct would bar you from any equitable relief." She turned to me. "Mr. Thompson, while the court understands your desire to protect assets you developed through your own efforts, the timing of your disclosure about the software sale was unfortunate. However, you had no legal obligation to disclose ongoing business negotiations during divorce proceedings, particularly when your wife had already made clear her intention to end the marriage." Judge Morrison closed the file in front of her. "The motion to set aside the divorce decree is denied. The original settlement stands. Mrs. Thompson, you are responsible for all court costs and attorney fees related to this motion." It was over. Outside the courthouse, Alicia approached me one last time. "I hope you're satisfied," she said. "I'm not satisfied, Alicia. I'm just done." "You destroyed my life." "No, I didn't. You destroyed your own life. I just refuse to let you destroy mine too." She walked away without another word, and I never saw her again. 6 months later, I heard through Richard that she'd moved to Phoenix and was working as a receptionist at a dental office. Dominic had been arrested in Miami for credit card fraud and was facing federal charges. I sold my restaurant management company and used the money to start a foundation that provided business loans to women starting their own companies. It seemed like appropriate irony. My new life was smaller, but more honest. I dated occasionally, traveled when I wanted to, and built relationships based on truth rather than convenience. Sometimes I thought about what might have happened if I'd told Alicia about the software sale before she filed for divorce. Would it have saved our marriage? Would she have chosen differently? But those were questions for a different life, one where my wife hadn't fallen for a con man and convinced herself that 20 years of marriage was a prison rather than a partnership. I'd learned something valuable from the whole experience. Revenge isn't about making someone pay for what they did to you. It's about making sure they understand the full consequences of their choices. Alicia had chosen Dominic over me, excitement over stability, the unknown over the familiar. I'd simply made sure she got exactly what she'd asked for, and in the end, that was